So keep your answers coming in while we do the initial intros. Welcome, everybody. I'm welcoming people from two separate groupings, well, probably multiple groupings today. So this webinar is being presented in part as part of the Saving Brains Learning Platform webinar series. But I'd like to also greet a new group of innovators that is joining this discussion from the Global Mental Health Program at Grand Challenges Canada, who are being supported by an international global mental health NGO, Cities Rise. So welcome to all of you, wherever you are and wherever you're from. And just before I hand over to Andrew and Jasmine to take us through today's webinar and to introduce us to our honored guests for today. This morning on the radio, when I was listening to the broadcast on the climate change conference, I heard the following, which I thought was apt for today's session, so I thought I would share it to you. The question was, why should we include all these different groups in our conversations and our deliberations? And the answer came, because if we ignore any one part of the stakeholder map, we will find biased solutions. Andrew, Jasmine, thank you.
Thanks, Penny. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for the interest in this topic. This is actually the second webinar that we've held on the topic of stakeholders and stakeholder ecosystems. Really doesn't matter if you didn't see the first. What we've been doing here is taking a few concepts around stakeholders that have emerged from our work with various teams across the Saving Brains community. In the last workshop, we looked at the idea of socially undervalued stakeholders and how we could unlock potential, bring recognition, boost the status of these groups that we often find within the work. Today, we want to move to a different topic, but actually one that's often related. And our sort of shorthand for this concept is win-win-win. So this is one of 6 or 7 concepts about stakeholders and working with stakeholders that we've identified. If you're interested in more about that and how the various concepts fit together, then on the Saving Brains Learning Platform website, you'll find a thematic brief and some other materials, some case studies as well, that goes into more detail about these. I think some of it came around as sort of optional pre-reading for this webinar as well. So if anything we say today causes you to be more interested in that or to want to follow it up, there's some great material there to do that. And equally, we've put some of these concepts together into a workshop, and we've been working with a small number of teams to look at stakeholders and to work through some of these concepts. And later on in the webinar today, we're going to be joined by one of those teams, the Early Journey of Life from Vietnam, to look at how they've explored this idea of win-win-win. So I'm going to dive in. My co-conspirator in this work has been Jasmine. So the two of us are going to give you an introduction to the idea of win-win-win stakeholder relationships. We're then going to go across to the Early Journey of Life team and hear a bit about their project and how this idea of win-win-win sits within their particular example. And then for the third part of the workshop, we're going to break into breakout rooms and give you an opportunity to share some of your examples of win-win-win relationships and strengthening win-win-wins in your ecosystem. So that's the 3 parts of today. So let's just quickly start at the very beginning of that with a kind of sense of what do we mean by win-win-win? Where's this idea come from? So our starting point is that as we've worked with innovators across the portfolio, as we've had discussions and used time at the Transition to Scale workshops to collect reflections, one of the things we've noticed is just how complex stakeholder relationships are in the work that's that is going on with many of the teams. There are lots and lots of stakeholders. There's often very little direct line of control of those stakeholders. There's nearly always a difference between those who pay for the service that a social innovator is providing versus those who actually receive the service, which is obviously a big difference from the business world, where usually the person paying is also the person receiving the service. We also keep hearing that some stakeholders and governments are often mentioned the most, often just keep changing. The goalposts move with these stakeholders. So we know that working with stakeholders is a complex issue. We know it takes up a lot of time. And it's why in our language, we've often talked about stakeholder ecosystems. The ecosystem, trying to give the idea of something far bigger, much less direct control into individual pieces of it, something where the players and the parts relate to each other and interact, but not in simple linear ways. So that's been our starting point for this work. And one of the things we've noticed about social innovators and discussions about this complexity of the system is that some of the most successful seem to have managed to create systems, ecosystems, where stakeholders want to engage more. They keep coming back for more, rather than having to persuade stakeholders to turn up. They're actually actively looking for engagement because the ecosystem is valuable to themselves. So we started to dig into why is that? What are the characteristics of a system where the stakeholders actually want to come back for more? We've noticed a number of things. The first is that the stakeholders in an effective win-win-win system actually all clearly get something back. In other words, there's a win for them. It's not just what they give into the system, it's also what they get back. And as we've explored that, we've realized that the wins can be all sorts of different things. Sometimes the win you get back is receiving some training and development that allows you to be better at your job or your work. Perhaps the win you get is new knowledge and information that helps you to be a better, more effective parent, or just practically to deal with a child who's crying, or whatever else it might be. So the wins can be quite tangible, practical. Sometimes they're slightly more philosophical, but nevertheless really important. Perhaps what you get back is recognition. Perhaps involvement in the project boosts your status or your involvement or your engagement. So this idea of wins can mean different things to different people. But when we're talking about wins here, we're talking about things that really motivate people, not just a simple transaction, but wins that cause people to say, actually, being involved in this system is something I benefit from. So the second thing that we've captured about win-win-win is that in the most effective systems, it's not just some stakeholders who get a win, it's just about all of them. The system is designed in such a way that there's a reason for everyone to engage in it. And increasing the number of stakeholders who are getting wins is really important. The third is these innovators seem to have created systems where the growth in the system actually creates more wins for people. In other words, growth is a good thing. Growth actually helps to create wins, to have more reasons to come back. It's often, particularly in the world where funding is short and difficult, it's easy to create the reverse. Growth in the system just shares the pot ever thinner, and you don't get a win. But effective systems seem to create wins where growth is actually in the system's interest and stakeholders get more out of it. The more wins you get, the more people want to engage. And of course, in the best systems, the win isn't just about growth, it's also about quality. So in other words, as quality improves, if stakeholders get more wins out of the system because the quality is better, then that really is the optimum situation, a system that can scale both in size and quality and create wins for more wins for the stakeholders as it's going, really is in a strong position and is ultimately describing our idea of a win-win-win ecosystem. So that's the concept of a win-win-win ecosystem. I'm going to hand over to Jasmine just to talk about some of our experience of how people have actually gone about building these.
Thanks, Andrew. So how do you strengthen your win-win-win stakeholder ecosystem and scale it? So in our work through the Saving Brains Learning Platform team, we observe that innovators like yourselves already bring a very strong intuitive sense about how to engage stakeholders in your communities in a way that supports a successful delivery of the innovation, making sure that benefits reach families, and also in a way that then builds engagement and commitments from others in the community to further support the innovation itself. And as an innovation scales to new places and to new populations, the new context might look a bit different from where the original community work began. And so there is a risk that as an innovation scales, that the responsive relationships that were built in a smaller context can get lost. So we found that there's an opportunity to look at the stakeholder ecosystem more explicitly and more systematically to help spot opportunities and increase sustainability of the innovation as it scales. And so some of the ways innovators have found helpful to make their ecosystem more explicit include, first off, just laying it out there, identifying all the stakeholders who make up your stakeholder ecosystem, and then thinking about it from the perspective. So when the innovation is working at its best, what does that look like for each stakeholder? So putting yourself in their shoes, what are the motivations that drive what they contribute to others, and what is the win in it for them? And then looking then at the stakeholder ecosystem, how do you create new wins in that system, or even just strengthening existing wins in the system? And some of these wins can be a little bit more intangible, like Andrew was saying about boosting status. So how can you make those wins more visible so others can grasp it more? And then, yeah, and can you also connect stakeholders with each other in a way that they can create wins for each other without you being directly involved, in a way that then sustains the system to continue on supporting the innovation and feeling committed to want to scale and support the innovation further. So those were some of the questions that the Early Journey of Life team were thinking about when they participated in the stakeholder ecosystem workshop last month. So I'd love to introduce you to Ha Tran and Jane Fisher on the call with us today, and they'll be sharing their experiences and insights about their stakeholder ecosystem with real life examples from their work scaling the Early Journey of Life program in Vietnam. So I know, pass it over to Jane, who will kick us off with the presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Jasmine and Andrew and Penny, for this invitation, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues from around the world. The program we want to talk to you about is the product of a long-standing partnership between the Global North and the Global South, between Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, where I work, and the Research and Training Centre for Community Development in Vietnam, where Ha works. If we could have the next slide, please. So there was a long history to the development of our innovation. We had worked together to try to understand the many things that affect the health of women and the early development of their babies. And we'd identified through different research studies that there are multiple risks to the earliest development of young children in this setting. And so we built on this by developing a program that we called Learning Clubs, which is a psychoeducational program implemented in facilitated small groups in local communities by local community members who've been trained, that addresses all 8 risks to early childhood development, including nutrition, lack of access to healthcare, stimulation of young children, appropriate feeding of young children, and avoidance of violence and harm in domestic households. If we could have the next slide, please. So we have tested the benefits of this program for the cognitive development of children at the age of 2 in a cluster randomized controlled trial. And we drew on interventions that had been developed in other resource constrained settings, and we adapted them for Vietnamese culture and for the Vietnamese health and social care systems. So the program comprises 19 small group meetings and 1 home visit. And communes, which are the administrative unit in Vietnam, were assigned either to provide just the usual standard of care or the usual standard of care plus this program, which is now called the ERNI Journey of Life Innovation. Next slide, please. So the program is offered in a life stage specific way. So it offers both information and learning opportunities through role play, small group discussions, video demonstrations, take-home materials for review with families, and lots of opportunities for hands-on practice. It begins in early pregnancy and proceeds until the child is aged 2. Next slide, please. And you can see from these images that there were practical learning opportunities, and we also made every effort we could to have men respectfully included in this program, so that the early care of women who were pregnant and then in the period of life when they were looking after very young children and the care of the baby were really positioned as activities that both women and men could take part in. And you'll see there some of the topics that we addressed. And we addressed more indirectly ways of improving women's mental health by promoting caregiving confidence and by promoting gender empowerment so that there was a more equitable share of household work. The next one, please. And these very attractive materials were developed for use during the groups and for take-home review with the extended family and within the couple, which really reinforced all the information and the activities that had been demonstrated in the groups. The next slide, please. So with GCC's support, including these wonderful sort of workshops and training opportunities we've had, we've moved from the pilot phase through the proof of concept phase, where we've established the effectiveness of this approach and we're exploring the cost effectiveness and the process of implementation. We're now moving on to a province-wide rollout where we're seeking to integrate it into the existing Ministry of Health guidelines on ECD. Because of COVID, we've had to really explore digitisation, and then we're seeking to scale it up both in rural provinces and in industrial zones. And it's in this context that we've really been engaged in thinking about our stakeholder ecosystem and what we can do to strengthen it and ensure that all the stakeholders experience this as beneficial. So experience a win. Next slide. So sorry, this is over to you to talk about all our stakeholders and how we've worked out, how you've worked out how they interact with each other.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. And this is the way when we Jen deliver about how the project has been delivered, implemented in Vietnam. And when we have time to sit down with all the coach from the health platform of GCC and looking back to all the stakeholder who join into the process to help us to come far to this way. And we recognize that we receive a lot of support. And look at the map, we can see who involved into that. Look through all the map, you can see there are 3 levels. You will see on the left-hand side, it is the gray circle. Those are the level 1. Those are the key stakeholders who joined to deliver the innovation service during the last 2 years in Vietnam. Those are the community-based facilitator, provincial trainer of Hà Nam province, and the Department of Health and Education of the Women Union. Those are the key stakeholders who make it feasible for the innovation to implement in the rural of Vietnam. Through the service delivery, they brought tangible contribution to improve the health and the development indicator of women and children and family. Through that innovation, they fulfill their responsibility in front of the local authority. So that is what they gain. And what we gain, we, RTCCD and Monash University, we get a good practice of model to demonstrate Vietnam as a good practice in terms of ECD. And we got a confirmation that a low-cost structure, evidence-based, feasible, acceptable, and effective model in rural Vietnam is developed and delivered successfully. So you can see all the thick orange color, which link the gray circle together. Those indicate that they are the partner who closely work together to deliver the innovation to the end user. And they are the core partner to the service. And we could not recognize that if we don't put them into the map. And on the top of the map, you will see the green circle. They are the level 2. The green circle, they are partners who enable the evidence, the research opportunity of the innovation. They supported the unique selling point of the early journey of life. And we also offered them a chance to integrate their research into the cohort of early journey of life in Vietnam. For example, the World Bank implemented the gender empowerment study on our cohort, and then the McGill Canada implemented their DNA iSwap collection, data collection on our cohort. So we become the international site for research in this very well structured and scientific cohort of measurement. And look on the right hand side, you will see the blue circle. They are the level 3. They are the stakeholder who enable the scaling up. You can see the very big circle, the Ministry of Health of Vietnam and the the Vietnam General Confederation of Labor, and then down here, the National Women Union. They are the key stakeholder who can bring the early journey of life to go at the scale. For example, the Ministry of Health need for example, the Vietnam General Confederation, they can use the early journey of life to create the cooperation response to the UN principle of business and human rights, and create corporate clean products profile, so that our program can support them to fulfill that responsibility. And the Ministry of Health need to improve the MDG number 4 and number 5, reduce child mortality and improve maternal health. And the early journey of life can give them a tool to reach out that goal by contributing to the maternal and child health in the first 1,000 days of the children's life. And this can be easily to scale up to 63 provinces in Vietnam. And more important, the Prime Minister of Vietnam in 2018 issues a national policy about caring for children at the early age of life at home and in the community during the period 2018 to 2025. And all the Ministry of Vietnam are very fight difficult to deliver that. But when we approach to them about the early journey of life, they find it is feasible to deliver and to respond to that request of Prime Minister. So those key stakeholders in the blue circle enable us to scale up the early journey of life innovation to other provinces and industrial zones in Vietnam. And we can reach to the goal of big impact with their support. And we are very happy with this win-win-win partnership because we all benefited from collaboration. And what we learn when we are doing all of this mapping process, it is very enjoyable. It is very hard when we have to answer all the questions from the coach team, very hard question. But when you answer all the questions, it will come to a very new idea. We learned that there are undervalued partners that we didn't think of before. We learned that looking at deeply inside into each circle, into each partner, we can identify the heroes and we can bring them, voice them up, and they can be the person who bring the innovation to bigger audience. And we learned that there will be partner. We have to focus, so that we can make it doable for the scale up in the future, and don't go wide, but go focus. And we learned that working together and networking together with a strategic plan, everything is doable. And thank you for offering Jen and I a chance to present the early journey of life win-win-win stakeholder process. And we are very happy to answer any question should you have. Thank you. Thanks
enormously, Ha and Jane. Just a couple of things just to pull out from the map if we can, because I'm sure for many people on the call that this sort of be the first time of seeing a map quite like this, and it's what obviously the detail of the map is too small on our screens at the moment for everyone to sort of get into the detail of it there, but the text in particular is back to what I was saying earlier about the wins, and you've really tried to articulate on every connection what's the win that's going there, what motivates that stakeholder to be involved and to stay involved. I had the benefit of seeing, because you drew this map over about a 3-week period, didn't you, with sort of it wasn't a huge number of hours, but there was quite a lot of thinking time necessary to get there. And one of the things that I saw in one of the earlier versions was that your blue stakeholders, who I think are the ones who are really important for the future, for scaling, for sort of the future scaling, taking this beyond Hannan province. In an earlier version here, the sort of blue stakeholders weren't as well connected into the map. There were just some lines, and some of them were thinner, and so on. So that I think the workshop gave you lots of thoughts and ideas for strengthening and pulling these blue circles into the map. I'm just wondering if you could say a bit more about that and some of the thoughts and ideas you've got for how to bring these people into your ecosystem and to make sure they're getting wins as well.
Well, I'd just comment quickly there, Ha, because there's absolutely no doubt that the process was very helpful in enabling us to see this with more clarity, that because we've been focused very much on the details of running the trial and evaluating the outcomes, I think we haven't had enough time to look up beyond the horizon at how important these national agencies, including both the Ministry of Health and the General Confederation, but also the other community mass organisations, people who provide technical expertise that we don't yet have, perhaps commercial partners who might have a benefit from this, perhaps the INGOs who could use this to advance their own mission, that they're all absolutely crucial for us to build this beyond the smaller scale at which we've operated during this first phase of evaluating this approach. So they're not limited to one, but they include the political, the technical, the community mass organisations, the commercial and the INGOs. And I think they're definitely areas where over time these circles will get bigger as we acquire the capacity, I think, to communicate effectively with them, to draw them in, to show them what the benefits are of this approach to early childhood care and development in Vietnam.
Yes, thank you, Jane. And you will see that after the 3rd week of the key stakeholder series workshop, we recognize that there are a lot of things that we can learn from the future, from the to-be partner in the blue circle. Previously, we just think that what we get from them. But after the workshop, we know, oh, what we should give to them so that it can be win-win-win. Because what we can give to them, it means that that would be the point that we can convince them to partnership with us and work closely with us. And also when looking at the map, and then we recognize that now we're at the center of the map. It is for the position of 2021. But maybe in the year of 2022 and 2023, we will move to the other side of the map. And the key stakeholder, the blue one, the Ministry of Health, the Confederation Vietnam General Confederation of Labor, and the National Women's Union, maybe they will be at the center of the map. And we will be surrounding, because at that time they're the key stakeholder to scale up this innovation in Vietnam. So the map will change when our strategy changes and when depends on the achievement of each stage. So that is what we achieve when we're working with the map as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That idea of making heroes of some of your stakeholders so that they take on some of the leadership positions and really help you with that future scaling. But yeah, it's a powerful idea. Thanks enormously for the input, particularly for those of you who worked out where Jane is. Jane, you're officially in tomorrow, I think now. So down in Australia, the time zone is definitely not on your side. So enormous thank you for staying up and making the presentation.
Thank you.
We're going to move into the third part of the workshop, and in a moment we're going to shift into some breakout groups. We know that often people don't have the time to stay with us in the breakout groups, and if you are going to drop off, now's the moment to do it. I'll explain what the breakout groups are about, and we also know that people get huge value out of these breakout discussions because it's interesting to discuss a concept, an idea like win-win-win. It's really interesting to see how Jane and Ha have applied it. We think it's even more interesting to get into a discussion group with peers and talk about it and share experiences across multiple groups and really have a discussion about it. So that's what we want to do in the next piece of the call. For about half an hour, we'll move into breakout groups. If you're not going to join into the breakout groups, it helps us if you actually dropped out and drop out of the call, because then we can make sure that the breakout groups have got the right number of people in them. But in the breakout groups, what we want to do is for you to discuss two questions. The first is, having heard this idea of win-win-win, do you have an example from your own work? Is there a situation where you've managed to increase the number of wins or bring a stakeholder more closely into the system by strengthening a win or making a win more visible, or maybe creating a new win for that stakeholder? And then the second thing is just like you to reflect on, was there an important moment in the development of that win-win-win? Was there a significant moment that really helped you now when you reflect on it to strengthen your stakeholder ecosystem? So in a moment, Jasmine's going to push the button. We're going to go into groups. You're going to have just a little over 35 minutes for a discussion in your group. Love you to share those ideas and capture them. And then afterwards, we're going to come back to this plenary and an opportunity just to reflect and pull together some conclusions from all those individual discussions. So Jasmine, over to you.
Sounds great. Okay, so I'm gonna press the button now and that will bring us in.
Excellent. Well, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed an enriching, interesting discussion there. Discovered some new ideas or takes on the idea of win-win-win from the discussion. We're just going to actually take a couple of moments for a bit of silent reflection. There's sometimes nothing like having an opportunity just to assemble the ideas and thoughts in your own mind. And what I'd like you to do is just to pause for a couple of minutes and to look at the question that's on the screen. Based on the conversation you just had, what's one key idea or thought that you will take away? One key idea or thought that you'll take away. And what I'd like you to invite you to do is have a quick think about that and then type into the chat your thought or key takeaway. And once we've got a few there in the chat, we'll do a bit of kind of group reflection on what we've all taken out of that. So quiet from me for a minute or two. So some great comments coming through in the chat already about what people are taking out of this. Please finish typing something into the chat, but I'm just going to throw the floor open in case anyone would like to amplify or make an observation on something you're reading in the chat, or maybe bring something else in from your discussion that you think would be interesting. Does anyone want to seize the microphone and add a reflection on what we've been discussing?
Andrew, I can give an example of Muslim clerics and Christian clerics who had a win-win encounter. And my point in the chat was about the number of wins can continue to grow and to change. So the win might be initially that the Muslim and the Christian clerics want to have more status in the community by taking part in the ECD or Violence Against Women and Girls program, but that might change to actually, it might begin to attract more funding from international donors like Islamic Relief, or then it might change to social cohesion between Muslim and Christian communities within the program. So that just struck me when I heard you say, and you and Jasmine said at the beginning, that the wins continue to grow, but I also tagged on and they continue to change. So that was my contribution.
Great point, thank you. That links into something, I think, Nathaniel, you made a comment about new challenges like COVID sort of changing the situation as well and maybe creating new wins. I'm just wondering what triggered that comment or observation.
Well, we had a wonderful example from Emmanuel with a team in Rwanda that was found that when COVID hit, that they were able to create a different kind of government partnership because they had reach into the communities and could help spread the message the government wanted to send that were around public health. And at the same time, those meetings to provide the public health messages also create an opportunity for them to continue their programming and education programs. So in fact, they didn't fall behind on some of their timetables because they were able to achieve a dual objective. And so I thought a wonderful example that Emmanuel provided from Rwanda.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Ha, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yep, thank you. So in our discussion team, when listening to Sakara's lovely story, we recognize that when we're thinking about the financial support of funder, we often bias to outsider, to foreigner, to the big company, but we forgot that enterprise in the country may be a good resource of financial support to the idea that we have. And Sakara is very, well, he's excellent. He's well done in terms of mobilize the corporations. This needs CSR money in order to support him during the COVID-19. And he can encourage the local NGO to co-fund with him to the families and the children. That is marvelous. And the business in the country will be the key stakeholder. I think I could add in my map in the future. Thank you. And thank you, Sakura, for sharing your story about that.
Thank you. Aga, your
Thank you, up?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is Aga from Cameroon. Basically, in the chat, my contribution was about looking at win-win from the point of view of also giving, because very often when we hear the word win, we think of what we can gain, and very often forget about what we can offer. So it's good, as we're looking forward to building win-win partnerships, we also look at what we can offer. And as a matter of fact, starting with what we can offer often attracts more partners or stakeholders than when we are always just looking out for what we can get. So thank you very much.
Completely agree with you. I think that's one of the interesting things about the map that Jane and Har showed us. It shows how, you know, where one stakeholder puts something into the system, it becomes a win for another stakeholder, and you begin to see those loops and those connections coming up. And as you say, it's absolutely about the gives and the gets and the contributions working in all directions. Any other final reflections or thoughts? I was just going to comment on something Har said about the business community, and it's interesting. Quite often on these maps, we see donors being highlighted, or, you know, foundations as a key stakeholder, and they'll just have one line going to them which says, you know, what it's effectively what's the give? It's money, and no one's really thought about what do you give back? What is it that makes the donor want to be involved and to stay involved as well? What's the value, the win for the donor? And it's interesting when you change that to the business community, because sometimes it's the same thing, that they're seen as a source of money, but what is it that's going to go back the other way? And of course, there's a big difference there between working with donors and working with business in terms of what they might be looking for their wins in the system. So I like your example, Har, as sort of opening up that new route, but also recognizing that it might have a really different answer to how effectively to pull them in. Penny, you've unmiked.
Yes, in our group, Christiana from Grenada shared a wonderful story where the win came from the child themselves. And I think we do spend a lot of time worrying about the support network, and rightly so, because of their influence on the system. But in this story, she was pointing out how the changes within the child become a win, both for their fellow children and for the teachers that are managing the classes, because as children learn new skills and learn new ways and more positive ways of communicating, then everybody in that immediate area benefits, and how the learning increases. So it was a lovely story that Christiana shared, which reminds us that this whole network is, after all, about the children.
Indeed. Thanks so much, everyone. We're out of time, I'm afraid. I hope that concept and idea of win-win-win, you know, means something and comes alive in your work. I think Jasmine and I would both sort of challenge any team to start drawing a map and beginning to understand how those wins are moving around your stakeholder system. Har, Jane, enormous thank you to you for the contribution and sharing your experience today. Penny, back to you.
Thank you very much. So Jasmine, I'd like to ask you to post into the chat the link to the website. So Jasmine will be getting in contact with you all for recordings and notes and slides from this session. I add my thanks to Andrew, to Jane and Har, and all of you for joining us at whatever odd time of day this is for you. If you missed the email from Jasmine, then there is this website that you can go to and see all the increasing richness of information around stakeholders that have been being collected. And if we will not be joining again for another webinar until sometime in the new year, but we have been contemplating having an open discussion forum. We can meet each other. I know that's a problem sometimes on the internet, but keep your eye out for that email, and please join us for, as I say, an open discussion sometime between now and the new year. If we don't see you again until next year, have a very peaceful end of year. And we look forward to hearing more about your experiences, what you've been learning. These discussions are always a rich dive into understanding things more deeply, understanding how you guys are meeting your challenges. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Andrew and Jasmine, for pulling this all together. And see you all soon.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much. And looking forward to the next session, next meeting.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye for now.